So, welcome back. This is lecture 3 of module 2. In this module, we are looking at language variations. The different kinds of variations are possible in a language. So, we looked at the idea of regional language and also the way languages can vary in terms of social groups. So, social variation and regional variation, and also we discussed in the previous lecture about some related ideas. Now, we will look at more depth as to about the social variation. We have seen regional variations, how at the level of sounds, at the level of words, at the level of grammar changes might happen with respect to different region. Now, we will look at the key variables for social variation as well. So, first thing first, what is a social variation? So, variations based on gender is one domain which is very dominant within the social variation aspect of language. So, languages can differ in terms of various kinds of groups. So, we have seen in the previous lecture, gender is one of them, age is another, various kinds of networks are another. So, gender is a very important and a very prominent domain within social variations. Now, this variation can have very interesting outcomes, starting from a very simplistic way as to who speaks what, to a very nuanced, very critical kind of language differences and perception differences. So, we will start with the simple one. For example, in Amazon Indians, the language used by a child's mother is different from her father's language, because in this case many such groups actually use this, that the groups marry outside their own tribe. So, the within tribe marriage is not allowed. So, as a result, because each tribe has a different language, so the child will have a mother speaking in one language, father speaking in another language. So, this is very very interesting, but this is how each tribe will be having. So, each tribe is distinguished by a different language. So, men and women will be speaking different languages in the same household. Now, in other cases, language is shared by both genders, but certain linguistic features might be used differently by men and women. So, these are two sides of the situation called the gender based difference in terms of language or variation, gender based variations. One interesting anecdote here, it is well known that Margaret Thatcher, when she was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Margaret Thatcher is one of the most powerful, most influential politicians, statesmen of our time, and it is understood that she went through certain training to lower the pitch of her voice. Now, we all know that women's voice has a higher pitch compared to men, and as a result of which, if a woman speaks with a lower pitched voice, it is considered to be, the perception is that she is more authoritative. So, that is what she went through. She actually had taken training to lower the pitch, because this probably the idea is that lower pitch is associated with masculine voice and hence perceived to be more authoritative. So, that is why it is important for us to understand why gender is an important factor, it is an important variable in case of language variations, changes in language. Now, before we get into the data, there are various, because this is such an important crucial idea, there are many approaches to understanding as to why the changes are there, why there is a variation, what happens. So, there are primarily these 4 approaches: the deficit approach, dominance approach, difference approach and the social constructionist approach. So, the deficit approach in Lakoff's Language and Women's Place, this is 1975, is considered to be one of the earliest works of the deficit approach. Now, this work proposed that women's language is characterized by hedges, empty adjectives like charming, divine, nice. Women tend to use more of these adjectives, even though they do not mean much. They are vague, they are as far as Lakoff goes, it is empty. and then talking in italics, basically exaggerated intonations and so on and so forth. So, women's speech is characterized by these kind of features as far as this theory goes. So, women's speech as a result is described as weak, unassertive and deficient compared to male language. Now, this is one of the older versions, 1975. That was a time when women's language was considered worse compared to men's speech. So, this is some way, in some sense it is deficient in all these properties, because they use empty adjectives, they use exaggerations and so on and so forth. This of course has been criticized heavily for implying that women must learn to speak like men to gain credibility. So, credibility of women was connected to the way they speak, and the way they speak was considered deficient. That is about deficit approach. Then we have our dominance approach. This came as a critique of the deficit approach. It sees women as oppressed group and interpret linguistic differences in women and men's speech in terms of men's dominance and women's subordination. They do not reject the idea that men and women speak differently, but the reason why it is so is because women are dominated and subordinated, subjugated and so on and so forth. So, kind from a position of oppression, from a position of victimhood, language differences were looked at. So, it used to show how language is used to enact male dominance. So, language is you use doing power is doing gender. So, language is used to create dominance. This is another area, and not only men, but also this, as per this theory, not only men, but women also collude in sustaining male dominance in discourse. That was the primary take home lesson from the this particular approach. Then comes the difference approach. This stresses that women and men belong to different subcultures. They are simply different. It is not that one is better than the other, they are just different. So, this was a direct result of the 80s women's resistance or to subordination. 80s were a happening time. That is when they were the idea of women are not subordinated to men, women are similar, they are just different in terms of they belong to different kinds of subgroups. It is not that they are one is better than the other, they are just similar in the sense that they are two different entities, that is the idea. So, women asserted that women have a different voice, a different psychology and a different experience of love, work and the family from men, because they experience life differently. Women experience life differently, and that is why the language is also different. This also faced a lot of criticism. So, basically any kind of theory that you have, any kind of approach that you have will have criticism. Now, the next approach is the social constructionist approach. This is the more recent approach, where gender identity is seen as a social construct. You create gender identity, that is the latest theory. So, this they said that doing West and Zimmerman said doing gender rather than being a particular gender. So, by using, you can construct your gender identity by the way you use language, that is the prevailing paradigm. So, recent developments, earlier studies on language and gender were to show how gender had correlation with linguistic features, and now the aim has shifted to show how speakers use language to accomplish gender. So, social constructionist approach is the most recent approach in this language and gender, the way you understand language and gender relationship, and here you say that linguistic features actually can be used to accomplish, to construct, socially construct your gender identity. So, these are the primary approaches. Now, socio-cultural dimension of the male female distinction is there are two primary constructs in this. So, interpretation of the linguistic terms and the speech norms about or by different genders. So, these are the two constructs within this larger language and gender understanding. So, we will go one by one. Gender based language difference. So, words like So, depending on the gender, the words get a different meaning or different connotation. That is the first thing that we will look at. So, bachelor and spinster both mean unmarried individuals. However, bachelor does not have the negative connotation that spinster has. Similarly, many other such terms, and even the terms like professional terms like lady doctor, woman doctor, etc., are proof that these are professions where males are natural, because this is how the doctor, default doctor was a man that some time back. So, when women also started becoming doctors, so you use a lady doctor. So, you specify lady doctor, but default doctor is always a male. So, that is the idea here. Similarly, maiden, old maid, maiden has a negative connotation in works like maiden horse, maiden aunt, so on and so forth. And also the term is used for to mean inexperienced, untrained, etc. Similarly, adjectives like silly, hysterical, etc., are used mostly with women, but not with men, right. And then you can have many other such kind of lexical items or expressions that are typically used with women, and more often than not they have a negative connotation. So, calling somebody, calling a man an old woman is an insult, but not the other way around. Similarly, terms like father and mother create a world of different meanings when the fathering a child refers to a limited biological role, whereas mothering refers to a much broader nurturing role. So, similarly, working mother and natural mother, biological mother, this kind of differences are used for mothers, but we do not talk about unwed father as much as unwed mother. Similarly, lady has been cited as a term of honor, but at the same time we can also say cleaning lady. There is no garbage gentleman. So, you can have n number of such examples where the language use even apparently similar or equivalent terms have different connotations with respect to the gender that they refer to. That is one. Similarly, you also have gender marked pair like sir, madam, lord, lady, master, mistress and so on, even if they started out on equal footing. So, in the British context, lord, the wife of a lord is a lady. So, Lady Mountbatten, Lord Mountbatten, like that. So, they started on a similar footing, master, mistress, but over a period of time things actually change. The semantics change over a period of time, and they do not always end up being similar. A very witty, very interesting example that you find in many textbooks will be this example that shows the social structure difference between England and US. So, the comment was, once I was married to a dame and now I have a mistress. Now, this is a quote by former VC of Oxford University. He was talking about his wife, who was earlier the dame of the British Empire. The title, the British have all these elaborate titles. So, dame of this, duchess of this, lady of that, so on and so forth. So, she was her official title was dame of the British Empire, and later she became the head of the particular college. So, there the term, so Girton College, and so now she will be called the mistress, head mistress or something. So, that is why he said, earlier I was married to a dame, but now I have a mistress. But in the USA context, this will not have a very nice meaning. So, that shows that over time the terms do get that the meaning changes. Something as personal and marker of identity as names also undergo differential treatment. For example, so through marriage women become, as many say, Mrs. Man. So, Mrs. whatever X. In Greece, married women take the possessive form of the husband's name. In India, you take the surname. In Greece, you take the possessive form of the husband's name. So, X is whatever. In China, women are referred to in terms of their role, like third daughter, little sister, so on. the Book of Common Prayer pronounces a man and a woman as man and wife. So, when the priest will declare, now I declare you man and wife. So, man remains a man, but the woman turns into a wife. This kind of examples are cited as differences in terms of lexical terms, which has a very different connotation with respect to gender. Now, difference in terms of language use. There are many studies that try to show that women use language differently, even when the vocabulary is same, but the tendency to use certain terms is more in women as opposed to men. For example, this is a very interesting quote. So, do you say, this is how you write GRR on Twitter? You might be a woman or a dude with a lot of lady friends. So, the way you use language in the social media, typically in informal setup, formal setup you have to follow the same kind of language, but in informal setup women tend to use a lot of this kind of words, and this is a marker of the gender based differences in terms of use of language. Similarly, many other such examples are there. Then there are social norms that can be reflected through linguistic items. This is a culture specific kind of difference. Some cultures have different depending on the gender, the language, the practices, social practices will be reflected through language practices. So, for example, the Abipon in Argentina have gender based difference. So, speaker, hearer are male, then the language will be different. Speaker, hearer female in terms of Yana in California. Similarly, hearer referent physically disabled, there are these Nootka Indians in Vancouver Island. So, on the basis of these kind of characteristics, language structure will be different. And then the commonest characteristic feature of to be reflected by specific linguistic item is gender. So, these are things that are these are places where this has been studied. Gender of the speaker affects the structure of the language that the speaker uses. So, Island Carib, Japanese, New Guinea, all of these languages will have a different variation when the speaker is a woman. So, based on gender, the language structure also will change. Now, there are some other interesting things as well, speech form difference with respect to gender. One such domain is the purity factor. So, working class speech, that this is a consistent finding in social linguistics that some of the gender difference in speech with respect to the class. So, working class speech and their equivalents are considered tough and masculine. Hence, more than men, more than women tend to adopt that speech form. More often than not, men tend to adopt the working class variety of speech, because that is considered to be more masculine, more tough. Many societies expect the higher adherence to social norms from women than men, as a result of which women do not use the less pure form of the language. They stick to the purer form of language and do not typically adopt the working class dialect, because of the social expectation from women. Women are supposed to stick to the better form of the language. So, this is another an area where the gender difference in terms of language is visible. Then there is this idea of women's speech as taboo. So, this is seen in the case of Island Carib. This community decided that certain sounds, if pronounced by women and children, will bring bad luck to the community. So, this is women are not supposed to say certain things. In this case, it is also about the children. So, they will be restricted. So, they have to replace those sounds by some other sounds. Similarly, among the Zulus, the women are not allowed to take the name of certain male relatives, failing which she could be executed. Hence, these communities have a women specific speech form. They are not supposed to address some male relatives. This is also this is also been reported from some places in India, where typically this will be more prevalent in terms of the in-laws. In some of the areas in India's hinterland, daughter-in-law cannot directly address the father-in-law. or any other older male relative from the husband's family. In that case, they use an indirect form of language. So, they will have to address an object rather than the person directly. So, this is something that is there in many cultures. So, this is also another region where you see the gender specific language difference with respect to usage as well as structure. Now, there are criticisms of identifying women's speech as taboo. But it is not just taboo that can tell us why gender specific language forms are possible or they are prevalent. So, the existence of gender differentiated speech forms may exist for other reasons. For example, how could certain linguistic items become generalized for female speech to begin with? Taboos can restrict speech, but it cannot create another kind of speech. So, taboos do not really answer that kind of a question. And then even when differences do exist, women are seen using the male forms at least for the purpose of teaching their male children. This is also an interesting finding. Often what happens, even if the men and women have different speech forms, women actually do use the male forms in certain cases, like teaching a male child, because she cannot teach the female version of the speech to the male child. So, that then the restrictions also have exceptions. That is another domain, another point that has been talked about. And similarly, very often the female forms die out slowly, as in many communities it is only the elderly women who use it. So, that is also something that the taboo cannot explain, because if it is taboo, it will remain a taboo. The language will not cease to exist. Hence, there is a conflict there. And the fact that often the women's female speech is the purer and better form of the language, that also does not really explain things. So, the female forms seem not to have changed over time, whereas the phonological pattern of male forms have undergone lot of changes. So, this is also true for this working class difference that we talked about. So, all of these points do not really hold up when it comes to that taboo, women's speech as taboo. Now, there are some universal tendencies as well that Janet Holmes have talked about. So, these are the universal patterns. So, women and men develop different patterns of language use. Women tend to focus more on the affective functions of an interaction compared to men. Women tend to use linguistic devices that stresses solidarity. This is not in a judgmental way, but this is something that Holmes talks about in terms of the more or less prevalent features across the world's languages. So, women and men's speech will be different on these. Women tend to interact in ways which will maintain and increase solidarity. Women are stylistically more flexible than men. These are some of the differences that Holmes has talked about. Now, here we have some data from South Africa. Here comparing the speech of English speaking male and female high school pupils of the same age in the same town. So, regionally, geographically it is the same area, but we are looking at gender based social groups, how they their English use of English language. So, they studied the pronunciation of 4 vowels in the words like gate, vowel of can't, vowel of out and the vowel in boy. And here this chart shows us the difference in the use of these vowels with respect to the boys and the girls. Boys use more non-standard local pronunciation than the girls. Thus, the female speakers were found to be using more of the purer or the better forms of the more correct forms compared to the boys. Then this particular study was carried out in India. This analyzed speech difference between male and female speakers comparing across Hindi and English, and investigated the form and frequencies and pitch. Do male and female speakers have a difference in terms of the form and frequency and the pitch? What they found out was the females generally had higher pitch than males, which is typically the finding, but it was experimentally proven in case of this particular study. Female speakers had a relatively higher F1 and F2. English and Hindi displayed distinct formal patterns. So, the conclusion was gender based variation were consistent across languages. So, both in Hindi and in English they found the same kind of pattern. So, it supports the universal tendency of female voices being higher in pitch. This is already an old finding. So, this was corroborated. Age is yet another variable in this domain, because we know that based on the age group languages are used differently. So, the way a small child uses, the way adolescents use and the way the adults use language, they differ. They differ in many terms. Most visible difference will be in the lexical domain, but there are other differences as well. So, at the same time there are cultural differences too, with some cultures having higher pitch among male also, and pitch is one first thing that you see in terms of changes in case of men. So, in the younger small boys will have a higher pitched voice, and as they grow pitch will get they will be low pitched, but for women it is it remains higher. And then there are other varieties. So, vocabulary will also change. Swear words, use of latest cool words, like today we have these Gen Z words like no cap and many other things. So, this is something that is most readily visible with respect to age dependent language difference. So, there is this another study, very interesting study. These days you have the frequency of a word like. If you see this is most prominent in US English, but this has come to India as well. Lot of use of the word like in any discourse based on the younger in the young adult group, adolescents and young adult group. So, this is a study that looked at it. So, 10 to 12 years, then 13 to 14 years, 15 to 16 years and 17 to 9. So, you can see it from 10 to 16 it is a very steady increase, and after that when they are adults, when they have to when as they grow older, then 17 to 19 it eventually comes down. So, younger New York gang members delete there are some other variations as well. So, New York gang members use delete the ed marker, so the past tense marker more than their adult counterparts in the same gangs. So, New York gangs have been studied extensively. Within the same gang, depending on the age, the grammatical differences are found. Also, they use the usage is higher than among the lames. Lames are those people who are not part of the gang. So, this is also another difference. Thus, the use of certain words by young people in a community is often why do they do this? They do this in order to signal a group identity, even within a bigger group. So, they all are gang members, but the younger members want to make an identity, separate identity compared to the older one. So, they use a different kind of a structure. So, when linguistic change spreads through a community, there is a fixed pattern of age related graded use. So, young people tend to have a higher usage, while old people will show lower use of certain things. So, this is one such example. Vernacular pronunciation of standard ta in medial and final position in New Zealand English. So, how things change. 20 to 30 years it is 82%, 40 years it is 33%. This is for glottal stop. Similarly, flap for medial T, this is how it changes. So, certain kinds of sounds and how their usage drops over a period of time. So, in the younger 20 to 30 years the usage are high, as they grow older usage grows less. So, the use of standard and prestige forms generally peak at the age of 30 to 55. The reason why it is so, it is considered because the social pressures are high, because at this stage you are working, you have to make a living and you have to you better conform to the social norms in order to contribute to the society, because you have to now you are trying to make a living. So, thereby the pressure to conform is higher, and as a result of which in this age bracket typically people use the standard and prestige variety. So, Eker talks about the linguistic life course in through stages. In the childhood, there is a lot of variation in the at age 3 inherently variable like adult speech. So, they show that variation in their both stable social linguistic variable like using ing, td deletion and so on and so forth. They show a lot of socio linguistic competence even at a small age. At the age 3 they do show a lot of variation, right. So, stylistic and gender differences appear by age 10 plus, where boys start using more non-standard forms than girls. So, these changes start to appear at 10 years with the non-standard forms making an appearance. Now, comes the adolescence. So, after late childhood, changes already start to show. Adolescent, this is specific to industrial society and modern era. It is the focus of development of the social use of the vernacular. This is the time when linguistic change from below is advanced. So, this is a time when they create the identity. Adolescence, this is more relevant in the industrialized modern societies, where adolescence is considered a very important time when you create group identity. So, in that case, the whatever is cool, whatever is considered tough, men young men will be trying to get into those forms. That is one very interesting development with respect to language changes with respect to gender. And then class correlation will be weakened, age specific categories will dominate. That is what is about adolescence. And then adulthood, you have conservatism will start to set in. This is what I just mentioned as to conform, because this is when you have to use the standard forms, you have to use the prestige forms, because this is the time when you are in now you are working, now you are earning a living. So, you have to conform to the norms of the society. So, that is when that is also visible. So, the standard use of standard language in the workplace and so on. So, this 1983 study found that African American women showed socio-linguistic demands in the workplace as a key factor in patterns of variation. So, this becomes this is dependent on the workplace expectations and social networks in the workplace. So, there are all this, and then finally, you have the old age, retiring age. So, this is the, of course, this is the less studied of all of these. Labov found that older men's linguistic behavior seems to relax as power concerns are less. Now, you are relaxed, so your language use also they do not really, but this has not been studied at length, only few studies exist. Elderly in local networks often use more vernacular, because the pressure to conform is now less. That is why you see this kind of differences. So, the studies that I have quoted here are I have added the references as well, you can look up. So, this is with respect to the social variation with respect to two important variables of gender and our age. So, this is where we complete this segment. In the next segment, we will take up some more variables. So, with that we have come to the end of lecture 3. So, this is lecture 3 of module 4. We complete lecture 3 here. Thank you.